Okay, so as most of you will be very familiar, this is the dashboard display of Business Pilot, where previously you would have picked up your follow-ups, albeit the function hasn't really changed. Most of you will have picked up from our update email that follow-ups have in fact been renamed tasks. The reason for the renaming is that previously, follow-ups were very much individual. You could only have one follow-up at any one time. So one person, one follow-up, one owner in a sense. The development that we've done here is to de-restrict that so that there are now the ability to have multiple tasks per job, per lead, per contract, or even per contact, so that different individuals can have tasks related to one job, or potentially one individual may have 2 or 3 tasks related to the same job. Tasks come through the dashboard in exactly the same way as they did before, organised in a date order. But there is also now a tasks tab within the lead screen, and also within the wrong tab, within the contract screen as well. So again, any historic tasks are visible within a task tab, where you can see who they were set by, who they were set for, what the detail is, i.e. the note, when it is or was due, whether it's been completed, and in the instance that it has, the date that it has been completed. The user can complete their tasks off via the edit button, simply marking the task as complete, or as before via the tick function on the dashboard as it was. Admin users can also complete other people's tasks. So if there is a reason why you need to clear anything down, or a reason why you may want to do that, then an admin or super admin, i.e. admin user or above, can complete off another individual's tasks. Otherwise, you can obviously only complete your own tasks. Obviously, the bigger part of what we wanted to talk about is the status progression, and that's what I'd like to move on to. First of all, I'm going to show you just kind of, show you how this looks within the actual lead and contract itself, before going on to sort of explain the kind of mechanics behind it. So, first of all, the visual displays of the lead grids, etc., and the contracts area haven't changed. The eagle-eyed of you will have noted that we now have a number of more tabs. So previously, we always had the ability to add a new lead. We had live leads, we had sold leads, and we had lost leads. In theory, they are all part of status, that they formulate part of our current statuses, and they were always statuses within the system. So status progression, in a way, has always been there, just less manageable. In order to give us a status summary area, we have also devised an all leads and, in fact, an all contracts area, where, regardless of status, all of your leads and all of your contracts can be seen. As you would expect, those grids can be filtered, and as you can see here, status is one of the additional columns, as well as the status date. The idea of the status date is, if you sort by that column, then you can obviously arrange the jobs by the date at which that status was set. So if you do have any flags in the business as to if a job sits at a status for, say, more than 2 weeks, then by using the data sort function, obviously you can then see at what point that status was set, to be able to isolate jobs that perhaps have sat in an area for too long. Going then obviously into an active lead, what you will now see across the top is our status. The status progression being the ability to move from one status to the next, and the list of statuses that are available. Obviously, this was a predetermined pipeline. It was, as I mentioned, obviously something that Business Pilot felt reflected the typical links in the chain for the customer journey at the point, from up to the point of sale, from lead creation, and also from contract creation through to the point of installation completion. Clearly, there are a lot of things that can happen between these areas, and they may be areas that you want to pad out individually for your business to create a more precise step-by-step process. But as this was a large rollout, we obviously didn't want to overcomplicate the status progression for people, but equally not give too little that it didn't add the value. Some of you will have noted that these dates these statuses were also apparent in the original Business Pilot system, or the previous version of Business Pilot. So we had a key dates area over here on the right-hand side, where manually you could add a date that the lead was followed up. Manually, you could add a date that the lead was quoted. You could also add a manual date for quote followed up. We obviously already had demo booked by appointment dates, which, as most of you will all know, you can do via the diary. And then when the lead progressed to mark as sold, through contract creation to sold, or in some instances was marked as lost, obviously that was all date stamped and audited through the notes of the lead. So we've essentially taken those manual fields and what we would sort of previously called solid statuses and turned them into a pipeline of progression. For any of you that haven't already played around with it, the live status is always the coloured one at the start of the bar. What you see then following it are the statuses that this particular status can progress to. In this instance, we have created, and that can go to any of the other statuses. This will become more apparent when I come on to the sort of the build side of it a bit later. But ultimately, we have allowed any status to progress to any other status. Therefore, at any one time, whichever one you see here, you will see all of the other options on the right-hand side. If you wish to progress the lead along the progression, you simply click the next status. You're then asked to select a date at which the status has changed. That will always default to the time and date that you are. If for any reason you are doing something retrospectively or behind the time, that is the reason for being able to set the date of that progress. If I hit confirm here and just allow the system to refresh, the status of the lead has moved from created to followed up. So in essence, we have now spoken to that customer, followed up the lead. You'd also see over here, we now also have a populated date for the followed up. As I'm an admin user in the system, you can actually see that this date is also retrospectively changed, can be changed as well. For non-admin users, that would appear as a fixed date, more like the coloured row below it. Please do note that if you do change a status date backwards for any reason, that can and will affect the order of status. So if you had quoted it, but you then later demo booked it and changed the date of the demo booked here, it could move the status backwards. So just be aware if you are looking at manually changing dates that can affect the status as well. Moving it through very simply from followed up to the next status, which may be demo booked. Again, just simply click on the demo book tab. Sorry, I've got a lot of windows open here. And again, it will be a simple case to move it along to the next status, which again will refresh. And as you can see, the status moving along all the time in the live column, and we're being left with then the other alternate options to the right-hand side. At the point that we get to one of the solid statuses that we had previously, rather than a mark as sold, mark as lost, buttons down here, those same actions are still carried out by the press of a button, but that button is now part of the status progression. So if I wish to mark it as sold, that is there. Please note, if you do mark something as sold, you will skip the mark as sold sort of creation area and take it straight through to a contract. We have to have the sold status because it is part of the CRM. When we get to the progressions and the building of the pipeline shortly, I'll explain how the sold status can be effectively hidden via the progressions to stop people being able to immediately sell off a lead without going through the mark as sold phase. And then equally, obviously, if it does end up as a lost lead, you still have the ability to select your reason for loss, set another task if you so fit, and confirm that off. Obviously, that's a bit of a breeze through, but in theory, that is how the progressions of the lead work. We have pipelines. That is what the statuses belong to. If and when you choose to build out any of your own pipelines, you would then have a more extensive list, and you would be able to move a lead or a contract from one pipeline to another. And then when moving the pipeline, you can also then select the status that it will have when it goes over to the other pipeline. Obviously, this is the same pipeline we're already in, so the move would be ineffective. But the point being, with additional pipelines there, you can actually maneuver the job. So if it changes during its life cycle and you have a different way of pipelining certain types of work, then you can move that over. Here we have another lead that was already sat at a quoted phase. But again, we can just see the optional progressions there. And then going back to the previous lead, all of the status changes are detailed within the notes, as you would expect. So there is a date stamp as to when, and obviously a time via the CRM here, a date and time stamp as to when that status was changed. Moving on to the contract area, again in the grid displays, much the same in that we've now added a status column and status dates to the contract grid that can obviously be filtered. And then within the contract, we now have I'm sorry, bear with me 1 second. We now have a progression across the top. Again, there will be many other links between these areas. I'm sure that you will have already considered in your businesses and potentially be looking to pad these out. The lead progress probably does follow a slightly more limited route, whereas within the order processing side of things, obviously things can jump around far more. But again, the concept is exactly the same. Your live status is visible in the corner, and then the statuses that you can progress to are shown to the right hand side. So moving from created, arguably, to allocated to surveyor, to order processing, to installation scheduled, and then on to completed. We never previously had a cancelled option in Business Pilot, but via the status, we've now been able to essentially add that as a defining status for a job. So again, obviously potentially being able to go to cancelled from any other status. Pipelines can also be changed in exactly the same way. If you do have additional contract pipelines, then you can move that over and again change the status at the same time. So, sorry, get the Zoom share out of the way. Where is this visible and where is it built? So within the leads and contracts area, we now have a status summary tab for both leads and contracts. For the lead area, when you open up the lead and status summary tab, you will be presented with what we call a hierarchy display. So you will see all of your pipelines in a single line, telling you how many leads that you have or contracts that you have below that status. Equally within the contracts area, sorry, I'm just going to refresh here. Apologies, classic software issue. Rebecca, I'm not sure if you can just check if we've got a cache issue or not, but I'm not getting the drop down that I should be getting on the status. I'm going to load a live screen in the background and see if I can get it on another display. In the meantime, just while Rebecca's having a quick look at that, I'm just going to talk about the lead pipeline and the contract pipeline management. So via the admin area of the system, now obviously I appreciate for all of you online, not all of you may be admin users, but it's good for you to understand how the pipelines are actually created, and that obviously helps with the kind of the logic of how we move through the job. So within the manage areas, you have a managed pipeline, and there is the managed lead pipeline and the managed contract pipeline. So I've previously opened up these tabs. So within the managed lead pipeline, you can see the standard lead pipeline, as we have called it, and that is visible straight away. We have the option to add a new pipeline, which would open up a new box, and then we, sorry, if I can type. We can add in a different pipeline. If we hit update, that will automatically create us a secondary lead pipeline here. I've called this conservatory pipeline, potentially to manage a different type of lead. You will see here that it immediately has 4 statuses attached. Now, if I click through into that pipeline, those 4 statuses are created, markers sold, and lost. The reason why they are immediately populated is because they are paramount to the way the CRM works. So every pipeline, every lead pipeline has to have those 4 statuses within it. As you can see, if any of you have looked already, we've now added a column for active. This is the ability to turn a status on or off. As you will see, they default to inactive because we haven't yet engaged the pipeline. But if I make those active, what we're effectively doing is making them visible within the pipeline, or the potential pipeline that we're going to build. If a status is inactive, you will no longer see it within your progressions. The reason why we've added this function is because once a lead or a contract has been on a status, there is an historic trail for it. So once you've used the status, you will not be able to delete it from a pipeline, because there will be records of it within the CRM. But a bit like a user within the system, by making them inactive or making the status inactive, you no longer see them within the typical lists. Going to the standard lead pipeline that we had already built, you obviously see the same statuses here with the created markers sold and lost. But here we have added in additional statuses, which we then obviously have the ability to delete, albeit notwithstanding what I've already said, that if a lead or a contract has already had that status, you are unable to delete it. But for the purposes of building a pipeline before it goes into active use, obviously you have the ability to add and delete statuses. So to add a status, simply click on the add status box and then allocate a name to it. Now, one such may be quote followed up. Like the schedule board, you have the ability to manage colors. For no real reason other than to choose something, we have kind of allocated a bit of a traffic light system to this, in the sense that we're kind of moving from a yellow through to a darker green as the job progresses. So if I was to then add quote followed up, we now have an additional status at the bottom of the pipeline, which I can grab and drag up to where it is going to be relevant. Now, for me, quote followed up would be relevant to after quoted. So we've essentially added an additional status, an additional way of identifying the difference in a lead, perhaps between it being quoted and it being sold. Apologies, I missed you do need to set a standing when the status is added. Because of the default to the main standings within the system, the standing is automatically active. Any of these pre-existing statuses that are forced into the system due to what is called the standing, the name of it can actually be changed. So if for any particular reason you wanted to change the name of created to lead added, for example, I could update that. The status now would display as lead added rather than created. I'm going to change that back just because of the way the system is built. Moving on to progressions. So we've looked at sort of the statuses. Obviously, that's the kind of the label that we give it. We have the ability to add more statuses. We also have the ability to order those statuses. What we then need to be able to do is move from one status to the next, or from one status to other statuses. Here we have the list of the statuses: created, followed up, demo booked, quoted, marked as sold, and lost. And at the moment, we have those statuses going to any other status. So the way we do that is we add the status that we want to move from. So we can add as many of those in here as we like. And we add the status that we want it to move to. If we leave it blank, then it will go to all other statuses, or what we call any. Alternatively, we can add a more specific progression. So from created, we could say that created can only move to followed up. And in that instance, if I was to add that, if I was to remove the created to any, then when a lead is on a created status, I've moved that lead off of the created status, so apologies, but if a lead was on created status, then the only progression that we would see would be followed up. We would not see any of the other options. Equally, if we want to restrict being able to see another status, as we mentioned with sold, we could effectively hide sold by not having any other status progress to sold. So we could, if we wanted to go to any other but sold, then you simply click a more advanced list rather than leaving it open-ended. And then it would be impossible to move from created to sold. So in line with the example that I gave earlier. And if we have a singular progression, so we mentioned having created going straight to followed up only, it is then possible to add actions to that progression. An action can be either a note, a task, or an email. So at the point that that progression is made from created directly to followed up, if the option was to add a note, then a note box would open up for the user to force them to put a note into the CRM and save it. Equally, if it was to add a task, then a new task tab would open and force the user to set a task, whether that's for themselves or from any other. If we wish for it to send an email, then we can select a template from our list of emails and add that. That email will send directly to the customer. Obviously, the customer is the contact. It would send directly to the customer's primary email, the exact template email that you have. So if I was to leave that there, you can now see that we have a progression from created to followed up that would send an email. This works exactly the same in the contract area. We have the contract pipeline, we have the ability to add new pipelines, and we have the ability to edit the contract pipeline. Again, with a view of adding additional links in the chain, probably largely going to be centered around the order processing area, perhaps, or the installation side of the business, between having an installation scheduled and actually completing an installation. Again, adding status, we add our status, it could be remedial visit required. We can add a colour for that. Perhaps it might be more of an alarming colour to designate some level of importance. Obviously, it would be an active, and then we can then move that perhaps into the relevant area within our statuses, and then obviously we can then add a relevant progression for that new status. So from remedial visit required, perhaps it would then go to completed, and then again we can add that there. We may have a progression from perhaps installation scheduled from remedial visit required that we feel warrants a task, perhaps to follow it up. So therefore, from install scheduled, if we move from install scheduled directly to remedial visit required, we would then be required as a user to set a task at that point. So I'm just going to close a couple of these windows off. So, Rebecca, is there an update on the patch there? That's
yeah, Neil's going to push that through very shortly.
Yeah, I was just going to push that through live. Okay, thank you. In terms of the visuals of this, obviously we've mentioned the summary areas. For some reason that has glitched this morning, so we're just literally having that patch now, and that'll be resolved in a second. What we've also done, for those of you that are aware of the MI area, the management information area, or for those of you that actually have access to it, we do have numerous displays and dashboards within the back end of the CRM. We have added a new dashboard to this, which is purely related to status. And this is to give a graphical coloured display to where both our live and our active, our all leads and all contracts, as well as our active leads and contracts. So obviously, once you're into a more of an historical period, like in my business, for example, we have over 50,000 completed leads, whether they're lost or sold or active. So the lost and sold portion of the chart make up a considerable percentage of the overall. So the live part of the wedge of the pie, if you will, is a much smaller visible area. So you can see where your active leads are versus all of your leads. So here we can see a large portion sold, a small amount lost, what is created, booked, quoted, etc. So at a glance, you can get a good feeling for the percentage and proportion of your leads that are sitting at any one status. These are adaptive as well, so if you do click on any of the options, you can actually hide them. So you can effectively turn this into a different display. You might only want to see how many are sort of demo, how many are quoted versus quote followed up. Well, we've only just added quote followed up, so we have nothing sat at that status at this time. And then we have exactly the same in the contract side as well. Again, showing all of our contracts, those completed as well as those live, or alternatively, you can see everything just purely live. Just would like to be able to finish up on the actual summary display. So I will get Rebecca to give us a thumbs up as soon as we're ready to do that. But in terms of the key features of status progression, in terms of how we progress through, so I've closed all of those. And just as a bit of a recap, we've said that essentially the status is visible at the top of the lead and the contract. We progress from one status to the other by simply clicking on the display button and actioning that move. All of that is audited and demonstrated within the notes, and also within our visual display areas, which is our summary areas. So the summary area obviously illustrates what is in the visual dashboard here, so we can actually see how many of our leads are sat at a marker sold versus a demo booked, etc. Via the grid displays, we have the ability to manage the we can filter by status, and also within an all contracts area or an all leads area, we can see every lead and contract that we have in one place, and again see the status to go with it. And when those columns are sorted by date, we have the ability to see how long something may have been sat at a particular status. In terms of the build side of it, that is all run via the manage area of the CRM, the manage lead pipelines and the manage contract pipelines. There are no restrictions to the amount of pipelines that you have. There are no restrictions to the amount of statuses that you have. Obviously, the only restriction, may be for you the visual display of it. But then, depending on how controlled your progressions are, if we go back to that, in terms of what statuses can progress to the next status, you can in effect limit the display here, because you may only be able to go forwards and backwards 1 or 2 steps at any one time. So, in theory, you could easily have 10, 15, 20 statuses within a pipeline, depending on how controlled it is. We can jump from one pipeline to another, and then obviously action off our typical functions within the CRM with the markers sold and lost. And then obviously within the contract area, sorry, Zoom control is very annoying. Within the contract area, again, the completed function. I haven't seen the chat, so I assume that there are some questions that would have gone through to Rebecca, and I will hand over to her or ask her to forward me over anything that we can actually look at covering. So I hope as a brief run through, I appreciate it's been a little bit swift, but there's quite a lot of detail here, and obviously the use of status progression is very personal to every business. So hopefully we've given a good insight into the mechanics of it, the logic behind it, and the basis of how it works. So for many of you, that may well be enough to go off and have a play with it. And for those of you who've not been run ragged enough this year and fancy doing anything with your Christmas break, then perhaps there might be an opportunity in there for you. Otherwise, hopefully it's something that you can utilize moving into the new year. I'm just going to stop the share for a sec and just look to pull up some of the questions that we've had. So we've had a question from Victoria about skipping a status step. So going back to what we said about building the progressions, in essence, you can go from any status to any other status, providing that status is available as a progression. So in the instance, so the question is that someone decides before getting a quote that they will leave it for a while, and you want to mark it straight as lost from follow-up, providing you have a progression that has markers lost from follow-up, then you can skip straight to it. So at the moment, because we have no restrictions on the progression, you can go straight from followed up to lost. If you were to build a more restricted pipeline that said followed up could only go to demo booked, for example, then you would potentially have to, you wouldn't be able to move that status along. So it is important that you consider what progressions are more specific and obviously try and bring in the relevant links. At the moment, that does appear to be the only question that we've had. I suspect there may be more. If any, please feel free to fire in anything. There's no silly questions here. So there's a question from Scott. I think hopefully I'm understanding it correctly. So can you automate specific tasks to be generated from a status change? So the answer to that is yes, that we showed previously in the progression. So I'm just going to jump to a screen share to sort of demonstrate that again. Within the progressions, if we have a specific step, so from quoted to quote, let's say from demo book to quoted, for argument's sake, we can add a task as a specific action. So when the user within the lead progresses from demo booked to quoted, a task will pop up. Now, there isn't a way to sort of automatically close off a task via progression. That would need to still be done via the completed option within the task itself. Any other status progressions automated? A question from Nathan at Schofield. At the moment, we haven't linked anything within status progression to the physical acts in the system. So, for example, when a demo is booked, it will not automatically move to a demo book status. The reason for that is that we feel at the moment that status is is slightly hierarchical as well, in that there are higher orders. So, for example, if you've already quoted the job, but then you book an appointment or you book a return appointment, we would really see that the quoted status is still the highest level of status. So at the moment, we haven't built kind of automation in linking activity in the CRM to the status progression itself. It is something that, you know, we are minded to, and certainly in the future of Business Pilot, I certainly wouldn't rule out us bringing in certain amount of automation. But very much like when we built the system in the first place, we knew that there was a lot of commonality between businesses, but we probably didn't really fully appreciate how much. And, you know, we're mindful that if we put too much automation into status progression, that would be good for some businesses and not good for others. But if we were to call this our sort of beta version of status progression, which in essence it is, then I would say over the next 12 to 18 months, as with all of the features with our CRM, I would watch this space, and we will be taking customer feedback as our users start to get more into status progression. We would fully intend to take on board any comments or ideas that you have, and if we feel that there is an overwhelming desire for more automation within the status progression, then that is something that we would sort of consider on a case-by-case basis. Another question from Victoria: is there a chance for the user to read the email from the automated task? So the answer to that question is no. The templated email at the moment will just send purely as the templated email. However, you have the option to not send that email. When you make the progression, a box will open up telling you that this particular email is going to send. Do you want it to send? Apologies, I should have covered that in the brief run through. So it's a very good question. But at the moment, no, it's purely based around templated emails only. If you want to send something more personalized, or you feel that that particular customer needs something a little bit more finesse, then you just simply reject the opportunity to send the email automatically, and then send the same templated email potentially, but manually with amendments. Again, the email tie-in is something that we will look at as status progression moves forward and becomes a more integrated part of our CRM.